Sydney last night before he takes off for Rome. Now, the NAPLAN school testing system has, of course, had its fair share of fans and critics alike. Yesterday, a Senate report recommended a massive overhaul, saying NAPLAN has introduced a competitive element which is damaging both students and teachers. To delve further in this very complicated issue, we're joined in Adelaide by Green Senator Penny Wright. She was on that committee. And here in the studio, we're joined by education researcher Bronwyn Hinds. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Firstly, if I could start with you.
Good morning, Bronwyn, and good morning, Michael.
Yeah, good morning to you, Senator. Could I start with you? You were a member of this cross-party Senate committee that looked at NAPLAN. What are the main concerns you have in particular with this testing system?
Well, there were two major themes that came out of the inquiry. One is that that there's a lot more that needs to be done and improvements to be made if NAPLAN is to be the diagnostic test that we would be wanting. But even more compelling was the great amount of evidence that came before the committee about the damaging effects of NAPLAN being such a high-stakes test now. It's actually affecting student wellbeing and teacher wellbeing too, and affecting teaching practice, which isn't in the best interests of our students.
How is it affecting children in particular?
Look, there was a lot of evidence across a range of areas. Certainly there was evidence that children are highly stressed by the test, anxious, some examples of children vomiting, being kept home by their parents. We had evidence from one head of an independent school in Melbourne which said that his school had deliberately downplayed the NAPLAN test. They hadn't talked about it, they hadn't been doing practice tests. But when he spoke to a class of year threes, about half the class had been doing practice tests with their parents, and there was a great deal of anxiety there. And there's also the concern that teachers, in fact, are also asking not to be having the NAPLAN year because the pressure on them is so intense.
Well, Bronwyn Hinds is somebody who has delved in great detail into this issue. Should the NAPLAN test create that much pressure on students?
No, it shouldn't. NAPLAN is a very useful diagnostic measure, but it's only one diagnostic measure. It's not the only one. It's not an entire representation of a student's capacity or a school's capacity. It's just one more piece of objective, robust data that we can add to the other data we have to better assess how particular educational programs are using the allocation of resources at the school level and also at the system level.
Let's make it very clear what NAPLAN does. It does test the basic building blocks of any education system, and that is literacy and numeracy.
That's right, yes. And what is not always known is that these tests have been going on for more than 20 years at the state level. It's just only since 2008 that we've had a single national test, which means that states can better compare what they're doing similarly or differently, or better or worse than other states, to make a more informed decision about what programs to use and where to prioritise funding.
Just before going back to the Senator in Adelaide, just picking up on another of her concerns, teachers coaching for the tests in particular. Have you, having studied NAPLAN in some detail, found much evidence of that?
Not too much, no. There are some isolated examples, but I read through the Senate inquiry myself, and to me it didn't say that there was any overwhelming evidence or even widespread evidence of this occurring. I believe there could well be some teachers doing this, and that is not the aim of the purpose. It's just a snapshot benchmark, a little snapshot point in time how these students are doing at this school compared to how they were doing 2 years ago or at a different school. So teachers already know how well most of their students are doing. The main recommendations of this report, and there were only 4, and it wasn't a complete overhaul, it was just let's tweak it to make it better and let's all calm down a little bit. It's just one piece of data, and we need to better understand the richer educational environment.
And just picking up on Bronwyn's points there, Penny Wright, should we strip this back and just go back to the basics? It is a very important tool when you take all the pressure and the stress out. We are testing the literacy and numeracy standards of children all the way from grade 3 to grade 9.
Look, it's obviously very important that we have accurate, reliable data about how our students are performing, both individually, which was one of the original purposes as a diagnostic tool to actually see how students were and what additional assistance they needed, and also to have a sense of how we're going as a nation. One of the difficult, and certainly there were, it wasn't clear from the inquiry before the committee that those purposes were really clear. So certainly Bronwyn mentioned that there were 4 recommendations from the majority, from the unanimous committee recommendations, but the Australian Greens have actually made a lot more and very detailed recommendations based on the evidence that came before the inquiry. one of the things you'll find if you read the report carefully is that there's actually stronger views expressed in the views of the committee than were actually able to be agreed in the recommendations, which is somewhat odd. And one of the very clear views that's expressed in the report is that there is concern about the ranking and the comparison of like schools on the My Schools website, which is generally acknowledged to be what's caused this increased competition that's led to high stakes testing. And the committee view was that indeed we should be removing some of that functionality so that we aren't using NAPLAN to rank schools, which was never one of the original designs of the NAPLAN test. It wasn't designed to do that, and it's not an accurate measure to be able to rank schools and compare them in that way.
But going to that concept of league tables, just to play devil's advocate here, Penny Wright, wouldn't that be the natural instinct of any parent wanting the best for their son and daughter to weigh up the schools and look at how School A is going on reading and literacy and numeracy standards versus School B?
Look, of course parents want to know that sort of information. The trouble is they're relying on a league table or data that actually isn't necessarily accurate in determining whether there is a good teaching environment in that particular school. Because as Bronwyn has said, it's a snapshot in time. It's just one measure. There was a lot of criticism about the design of the test where it could be improved. So it's multiple choice questions, which isn't able to measure things like higher order thinking skills and the creativity. That's all part of the school curriculum. So what the worry is that we have parents thinking that they're getting really good data about being able to compare simply one school against another. But there's so many other factors that are involved, both in the accuracy of the test for that particular school and the cohort of students who are there, and also the other aspects that I've mentioned, which doesn't necessarily reflect the whole teaching environment of that school.
And Bronwyn, do you have an issue with that?
I agree with a lot of the Senator's points there. I would still say that one more piece of robust comparative national data is better than making a decision without this. So schools and teachers and parents will still be guided by many other factors. They'll be visiting the school, they'll be looking at the environment, they'll be talking to friends and family, they'll be visiting the school. They don't make decisions based only on NAPLAN. They're not going to compare every school in the country, but deciding between local primary school A and B, or maybe 4 or 5 different local high schools, they might decide it's not worth taking out a second job to go to this private school because the public school gets equivalent results. You might want to spend extra time with their family.
Penny Wright?
Yes, well what we need to do, I think, is be looking at the whole... I agree with Bronwyn, certainly parents do that, and certainly that's the wise thing to do, because often you can walk into a school and just sense whether there's a sense of harmony and friendliness and welcoming, and also the schools that are actually doing their work to encourage and maximise the potential of all the students, no matter what their baseline is. I come back to the importance of improving NAPLAN as a diagnostic tool so that teachers are able to use the results so that they're equipped to be able to analyse the data, and they can then actually assist those students who are able to be recognised as needing some extra support. And that's something certainly that the committee was agreeing to, that we need to have the results coming back quicker, if indeed it is to help those students who need more support, and equipping teachers and giving them the resources to be able to work with the data to improve the outcomes of students. Because I certainly want to work with the federal government when they look at this report, because what we want to do is to make sure that rather than having adverse effects on teaching and learning and on student wellbeing, we're actually putting students first.
We're just out of time, but a great conversation on this. Thank you both, Penny Wright in Adelaide and Bronwyn Hinds here in the studio.
Thank you very much.